Welcome to A Dad's Path, where we navigate the heart and science of parenting. Each episode, we tackle issues that dads everywhere face and deliver actions you can take right away. Join us as we uncover the balancing act of raising resilient, loving kids. Visit us at adadspath.com to learn more. Ready for the journey? Let's begin. Hello and welcome to another episode of A Dad's Path podcast. I'm Will Bronstein. Today we're here with Rachel Macy Stafford. She's a best-selling author and motivational speaker. She runs a very popular website called handsfreemama.com and has the Hands-Free Revolution. You can find her on Instagram, Facebook. We'll put that in the show notes. But her latest book is called Soul Shift, The Weary Human's Guide to Getting Unstuck and Reclaiming Your Path to Joy. So we're going to talk about that. It's really fascinating. But then also just in general, Rachel's website has a lot of great information and topics she discusses. So we're going to hit some of those today. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Will. It's so good to be here.
Awesome. So I want to talk about Soul Shift first, since that's your most recent book. And can you talk to us like why you wrote the book and maybe real quick what it is? It's pretty interesting.
Yes, absolutely. So Soul Shift kind of was a process that I learned through basically kind of a breakdown that I had back in 2010. It actually was sparked by a conversation that I had with my husband. We were pulling out of the drive to go on vacation, and you would think, oh, okay, this is going to be fun. Everybody's in a good mood, and yet I was ranting about really insignificant things. And my husband turned to me kind of looking like somebody had just died. And he said, "You're never happy anymore." And he didn't say that in a way that sounded like critical. It was more like sadness. And it echoed a feeling that I was having in my own heart and soul, that I wasn't happy anymore, that I was living very much a distracted, critical, like a critical observer rather than a joyful participant of my life. And I felt like there were so many external distractions in my life that were pulling me away from what matters. So between that conversation with Scott and some of my own inner truths that I was wrestling with, I realized, I want to stop missing my life. Basically, my girls were young at the time, and I knew it was precious time that I was missing. So long story short, I started what I called having these hands-free time increments in my day, because I knew I'm not going to be able to just not do any of my responsibilities and my job and, go offline totally, but I can have these undistracted moments a day. That's what I called going hands-free. And over a couple of years of going hands-free to eliminate the distractions in my external world, I realized there was a lot of distraction going on inside me. And that is where the soul shift process was born, which is facing uncomfortable truths that come up when you're practicing presence and saying, okay, how can this uncomfortable truth lead me to an action that can maybe make my life more joyful, more fulfilling? And so that is the process that I break down in Soul Shift.
Wow, no, that's fantastic. So the first part, you're talking like hands-free. It sounds like a lot of that is that cell phone is a big part of that? Just like,
yes,
that
was the most obvious one to me at the time, was just like, wow, the phone, the computer, the electronics, I'm focusing too much attention and energy in those areas where I had spread myself very thin in doing, all the things that people ask of me. I figured out later that was a lot of based on like, my worthiness. I was deriving my worthiness from being needed. And so, yeah, the first area that I tackled when I'm going hands free was I'm going to put away my phone, my computer, my to do list. Like for 10 minutes in the morning, I was like, I'm putting that away and I'm just going to be available. Because what I realized was when my daughters needed me or when Scott wanted to have a conversation with me, I was present, but not emotionally present. I could not connect with them in a way that was meaningful because my brain and my energy were being poured elsewhere. So I started these distraction free time increments where I just had this very hard boundary around these. I did it with rituals like, okay, during breakfast time or during hellos and goodbyes, during bedtime, during mealtime. So for me to identify different rituals in the day that I was going to be hands free really helped me have a parameter, and being able to vocalize that to my family. They were all on board when I said, and I didn't tell them right away because I thought I wasn't going to be able to do it. But once I did finally, I remember the day so specifically. I told Scott, he was taking the girls to the science museum, and I said, before you go, I just want to tell you I've been working on something that I'm calling going hands free, where I'm having these specific times of day where I'm completely available, completely present. I put things away. And he said, I've noticed something different about you, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Well, he comes home a few hours later and he says, I couldn't stop thinking about that hands-free thing you were talking about. And he said, that was the most enjoyable time I've had with the girls in a long time because I did not pull my phone out. I did not compare myself to the other parents. I just stayed really present and completely, in tune with what the girls needed from me. And that's when I knew, like, okay, maybe it's not just me that's having trouble, you know, getting in my own world, because there's so much constantly coming at us that I thought this might be something worth sharing. And that is really when I decided, okay, I'm going to start a blog called Hands Free Mama, and I'm going to be honest about everything that, because it's not something you really want to talk about. There's a lot of shame that comes with saying I literally missed the first couple years of my younger daughter's life because I wasn't there physically. I was there physically, but not emotionally.
Not emotionally in the way that you wanted
But
to.
but it was amazing to be able to be honest in that way, how people said, thank you for saying that. I'm struggling. I don't know what to do. And I am a special education teacher. So I've worked with kids that have severe behavior issues. So I knew you're not going to transform your life in these big overhaul changes. You're going to change your life by doing small, little, tiny steps, little efforts to go in the direction that you want to go. And that's why those little 10-minute increments of being hands-free were so powerful, because they serve as building blocks.
Yeah, no, that's really wonderful to hear. I mean, and I like that structure where you do kind of one little step at a time. Like you're saying, start with hands free, literally, right? Where
Yeah.
your hands are free, you're not looking at your cell phone.
Yeah.
But then there's sort of an emotional, deeper side that comes maybe from going hands free. So you're sort of present, but you also have, you're with your thoughts more.
Yes.
And I guess that process is sounds like was really profound in
Mhm.
uh, getting you to being fully present and fully kind of where you are today, where in a very happy place where you're helping a lot of people. But can you talk about that process a little bit? I like that how you said it, facing uncomfortable truths
Mhm.
and, a good, like, you started talking about the example of wanting to feel needed, the importance of that. How do you, or how do you find people start to identify and then work through those truths? And that's a great one. I'd be curious to hear other truths as well that you
Mhm.
kind of commonly have come
Yeah.
across, if you don't mind.
Well, so what happens when I try to describe this in my workshops is usually there's an external cue that when it happens, whether it's a conversation, a memory, an interaction that you have that makes you feel pain or shame, um, hopelessness, that rather than pushing that away, you acknowledge it. So I'm going to put this into an example. When my daughter Natalie was 7, I was very much wanting things to go a certain way. I was very much, controlling. Like I said, I was critical. I wanted things to go a certain way. And when they didn't, I would lose my cool. And she was reaching up to get a snack in the pantry, and she knocked over a bag of rice. As 1,000 tiny grains hit the floor, I felt myself becoming hot and rage, like, this is the last thing I need to deal with today. And this wasn't in the plan. And I'm feeling myself about to explode. And I look at her face, and Natalie is terrified of my reaction to her innocent mistake. In that moment, it would have been really easy for me to just ignore that. Like, just go on with what I normally did, which was yell and say, clean this up. But I looked at her face and I thought, this is not the mom I want to be. This is not the parent I want to be. This is not how I want her to respond to her mistakes in her life. And so I got on the floor with her. We picked it up together. And the painful truth that came to me in that moment was, I bully myself, and that then ripples out, and I bully my oldest child. And if I want to have any kind of relationship with her, and I want her to be able to live her life feeling like it's okay to make mistakes, then I need to do something about this. And so that painful truth that I acknowledged, I didn't have any answers. I didn't know, how am I going to stop being a bully to myself? How am I going to stop being so self-critical? I didn't know. But the bigger deal about that is that I acknowledged, this is not how I want to be. And now when you have awareness, then you can start to make different reactions to things. And luckily, I was doing my hands-free times at the time. I was doing those in the morning, and the very next day, I was alone with my thoughts, and this phrase just popped into my head, and it was only love today. And I didn't know what it meant. I just thought, this is important. I'm writing it down. And what I realized when I stood in front of the mirror, which is one place that I have a lot of trouble with my inner critic, I was getting ready to go somewhere. Nothing was feeling right. I wasn't happy with how I looked. And I stopped in the middle of that very critical spiral I was going into. And I said, only love today. And I turned away from the mirror, threw a hat on my head, and went, I'm going to show up. And so that's an example of a painful truth that created awareness, which then created a positive action or reaction to that. And so over time, turning away from the mirror and which was a triggering area for me, which is what I try to help people understand, that you have these areas in your life that really create these triggering moments. So what can you do to change that pattern? And so my pattern was changed by wearing a lot of hats instead of looking in the mirror. That enabled me to keep showing up. And over time, I realized I am putting way too much value on my appearance when nobody cares. They love me for me, just like I love people for who they are, not what they look like. So what I'm sharing here is a couple months worth of work, but that's where it started. That was the small step I took, and that's where it's became a healing process for me.
Wow. Oh, yeah, no, that's thank you for sharing all that. And I love I don't know if you call it a mantra, but only love today. That's just a very nice, sort of Buddhist or Eastern thought almost way. Just live in the moment and
Yeah.
appreciate where we are. Nuts. And you talked about, I think the word you used was sort of self-bullying. Um, and maybe the other side of that, uh, or like I think a lot of us parents and dads are self-critical and know we do a lot of things right, but sometimes we make mistakes. And how do you recommend? What do you have? Maybe some practical advice what you would tell parents or dads who feel like they have made a mistake or they feel like they want to be perfect in terms of how we act.
Yeah,
What do you say?
that's a great uh I just feel like we do put so much pressure on ourselves as parents to get it right. And there are so many, I feel like there's so many variables in our children's lives that can cause things to go off the rails. We can be the best, most engaged, connected parent in the world, and things are still going to happen. And so being able to be a parent that says, I really messed up when I responded this way, or I really messed up when I didn't show up in the way that you needed to me. And now I'm looking back on that and I'm realizing being that parent is such a gift for our children because they can see us modeling what it looks like just being a human being that's showing up for their life. And we're not going to get it right. But when we show our humanness to our children, that gives them permission to show us their humanness. And I have a 20-year-old and a 17-year-old now, and I've been doing this process now pretty much their whole lives. And I can promise you that the stakes get higher, the mistakes get bigger, the consequences get bigger. And I'm so thankful that I was able to be honest with my daughters about my own personal struggles so that they did not feel ashamed to come to me when they made some pretty severe errors. And being able to know that they didn't have to walk through that alone. And one of my favorite books by Bruce Feller, he talks about a strong family narrative. And I encourage people to look into that term. Basically, when we show areas that we're struggling in, and we say, for me, I have times where I get very depressed. During the pandemic, I hit a rock bottom, and I told my daughters, I said, I'm going to start talking to a therapist. And I felt embarrassed by that, but I knew that was the right thing to do because I know my girls saw me. I was depressed. I was not functioning, and I was also not responding to them in the way that I normally do, and they knew something was wrong. But instead of internalizing it that mom's mad at me or I've done something, then I'm saying, I'm working on this and this is what I'm doing. This is a healthy coping mechanism that I'm doing, because they also see when I'm not doing a healthy coping mechanism, which has to do a lot around food and not eating, and so they're observing all of this. So I've learned to be honest about, this is what I'm struggling with, and here's what I'm doing that's a healthy coping mechanism. My dad is a post polio survivor, and he shared some of his most darkest days and what he did to overcome them. And knowing what my dad went through, I know that's part of me. I also know that his deep depressions are something that I have. That doesn't make something wrong with me. That just means this is who I am. And to be able to articulate that to my daughters so that when they go through a dark time, they'll know, okay, my mom went through this, my grandpa went through this. We have a strong family narrative. This is what we are made of. This doesn't mean there's something wrong with us. This just means we might need a little extra help. And this is what it might look like. So I am a big advocate for being human with our children, because I just think it opens such a healthy door for communication.
Oh, it does. Wow. And I mean, I can't believe you shared that with your kids as you were going through the depths of that, pain and depression. That's really incredibly strong of you, because that's, you know, as you describe it, I mean, that's absolutely ideally what we would do as parents, but such a hard
Yeah.
thing to do in reality. So kudos to you, really. That's
And I think that, keeping in mind the age of the child, the circumstances on, there are things that might feel appropriate to share and things that maybe you want to be more vague about, but your child, and just to be able to be open with them. Sometimes when my kids were little, and I would say, I learned to say to them, like, I can't talk right now because something just happened. One day I lost like 5 chapters in this book that it was just gone. And I had to pick my girls up from school, and I felt like raging in that moment, and I was so angry. And so when they got in the car, I said, I can't talk to you guys right now because something just happened to the book I was working on, and I just need a little time. And they were like 7 and 4, and they could understand that. And instead of me yelling at them because I was upset about the book and them thinking I've done something wrong, I was able to communicate with them so they could know what I needed, which again is so good, because then they can ask their parents what they need when they get in the car and they're in middle school and they've had a really sucky day, and they remember when you asked for what you needed, and that's going to empower them to ask for what they need.
yeah. No, that's so powerful, because you're right. It really does sort of two things there by, creating the openness in your family. So you have that communication, and it also, it models, and I like the word humanness better than model. I always use model, but showing that you're human. I mean, that's
Yeah.
because we are all human, and our kids, unfortunately, are going to go through this thing called life, which has its ups and downs, and everyone goes through them. But how, giving them the tools to deal with it properly, or to at least communicate and figure out what they need, what tools can help
Yeah.
them, is where the power lies. It's great.
Thank
What do
you.
you recommend, if we could just jump? I love kind of getting personal, and then also going like brass tacks, tactics here. So, what do you recommend for self kindness? For us dads or parents who are trying to, all right, things are feeling stressful. Like, what do you see that works
Mhm.
emotionally and just in reality? Yeah.
Well, I think one of the best ways to practice being kind to yourself, which is one of my practices in the Soul Shift book. in order to start practicing being kind to yourself, you need to become aware of how you're talking to yourself. So if you're not even aware that you're being critical or negative, you're not going to be able to change that. So the first piece is starting to pay attention. Like I said earlier, about figuring out, okay, why do I always yell, or why do I always feel angry when we're leaving the house? What is happening here? Because I realized I stood in front of the mirror before we would leave the house, and I would always yell at my girls when we were leaving the house when they were little. And there was a correlation. So in order to change the way that I was talking to myself, I had to first become aware of that inner dialogue. And some of us will think, well, I don't really have an inner dialogue. Well, inner dialogue can mean many different things to many people, but you do have feelings inside yourself. You also have messages that you might have internalized as you grew up. And so becoming aware of, okay, this is how I'm talking to myself, and then to be able to respond. I had to start with a stop phrase, which was only love today. So I am really big on tying my worth to my productivity level. And so something I catch myself saying that's not helpful and not healing is, I'm so unmotivated. So if I catch myself saying I'm so unmotivated, then I need to stop and say, would I say that to my children? Change it to second person. You are so unmotivated. That makes me bristle. I would never say that to my children. So then I take it one step further and say, okay, what would I say to my children, or what would I say to Rachel if I step back from myself? It's a powerful visual if you can kind of come outside yourself and look at yourself in that moment and have compassion. And I'll say, Rachel is dealing with this, this, and this right now. And she's going to get to these things as she can. And right now she feels overwhelmed. So have a little grace for Rachel. She's doing the best that she can. And so kind of stepping outside yourself, if you can think through that process of, what would I say to my child if they were saying this to themselves? And I know that when I would tell myself I'm a bad mom, that did not help me come out of the negative spiral. In fact, it made me go into a worse place. So when you're doing, like I mentioned, those hands-free times and that practice of presence, those are it's such a good time to think about, all the things that you're doing, how you're showing up, and to really focus on your contributions, not where you're slipping up, because our tendency is to look at the places where we're, failing, when in actuality, we could just be putting a measuring stick out there that is really not something that we value.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, you think about when your child is running and they fall and they hurt, they fall and, looks like they scraped their knee, and the difference of being like, oh my gosh, are you okay? Are you okay? Versus, wow, you're so brave. Did that hurt? Like just that
Yeah,
little shift in language,
exactly.
how impactful that is. And it's, I mean, even more powerful to yourself, your own self-talk. And I love that, the way you step out and say, hey, go to the second person, would you talk to your child like that? Like, no, well, why would you talk to yourself like that? And I
Right.
think it's a trap we can all fall into.
Oh, easily.
But and once you identify it, I love how you gave us a like tool to kind of get out of it. And,
Yeah,
um,
I
mhm.
know there's a lot of people who will say, write positive affirmations to yourself, like I am enough. But the reason those don't stick is because they're kind of just standing there alone. You don't you need to have that critical statement, and then you take that and you make it positive. So when you have, maybe I am enough works, but you first have to identify that you are scared of not being enough, that you're scared you're going to let someone down. And so identifying, okay, I'm feeling like this report that I'm about to turn in is not very good. So identifying, this is how I'm feeling, this is how I'm talking to myself. Now, what would I say if I was going to put that into second person? I would say, Rachel, or third person, Rachel did her very best. Rachel doesn't have to do everything 110%. So the standalone affirmations are beautiful, but to identifying the negative thought before you come over to that self-compassion phrase is much more effective.
Getting to the root of the issue
Yes.
and understanding. Yeah. Yeah. Um, that's, I love that again. So switching gears just a little bit here in terms of, you know, I guess there's self care, there's parenting, and there's professional. Maybe if I'm creating three buckets of time we have, so to speak, how do you recommend or how do you manage those? You're an author. You're also a special ed. Are you still a teacher? Are you still a special ed
I'm
teacher?
I'm still certified, but I don't practice.
Okay, but you're an author. You're a mom. You need time for yourself. How do you balance it? How do you recommend parents kind of balance those buckets when you're feeling kind of overwhelmed in some or all, all of them sometimes?
Absolutely. Well, I don't really like the word balance because I really think that kind of leads us astray, because we're not really going to balance it. But what we can do is we can make a commitment to ourselves that when we are in the work setting, that's where we're going to be. But when we go to the personal life setting, we shut the computer and we put the phone away, to make a commitment that I'm going to be all here. So wherever I am, I want to be all here, because if you are spending time with your loved one and you're not there mentally, emotionally, it's it's about as good as being back at work.
Hmm.
So what I try to do is, even if it's just for 5 minutes, to be all there. That is such really a gift. It feels like you're giving a gift to the person that you're with, but it's actually a gift to yourself, because you're like, I don't have to compete with all this other stuff. I am just going to allow myself to be here in this moment and really experience this full connection. Because when you allow yourself to be where you are, there is a peace that you feel that you don't feel when you are trying to, micromanage, or, do all the things and you've got it going on in your head. And I talked about those painful truths, and you had asked me some other ones. Well, the first one that I mentioned was, I am missing my life. That was the one that I talked about, where Scott and I were leaving for vacation. Well, I am missing my life was was the painful truth that became, over time, I am worthy of showing up for every moment of my life. So when I recognize the painful truth, I am missing my life, I began doing the hands-free increments. I realized what happened to me physically, mentally, emotionally when I allowed myself to be where I am. A beautiful truth surfaced, which was, I am worthy of showing up for every moment of my life. I don't have to try to be in all the places. And so when you allow yourself that permission and you decide, I'm worthy, I don't have to prove myself worthy of rest or worthy of vacation time or worthy of relaxing in this hammock, which I think we always do to ourselves. We say, well, I can't relax until I got this, or this done. But it's a game changer when you decide, I don't have to justify what I need to be a fulfilled, happy, well rested human being. That I'm worthy of that no matter what. It's a game changer in your life and in your relationships as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to look at it. Obviously, there's no one right answer, and but
Yeah.
it's listening to your inner voice and really understanding what you need, and not trying to deny that. I mean, I think there are certain seasons, so to speak, in parenting or in life where it's harder to, you have to shift focus more one way, towards another, whatnot. But I think it's important to keep those, keep your North Star in
Mhm.
mind, right? Like, this is why I'm doing this, and this is my life, and being present, and I love the hands-free idea. I mean, it's very practical, obviously, on one end. I mean, just, hey, get rid of your phone, and then it just unpeels like an onion, all these different layers of, wow, no, you can go deeper until you find, hey, this is who I am, and this is how I can live my life, and be more present, be happier. It's really beautiful.
I do think it's, talking about like kind of the legacy that we're leaving. Um, I just think it's going to be really hard for kids who are growing up with technology to understand, like where the soul filling experiences come from. They're not going to be found on the phone. And everything is so digitally connected, that I think, it's not something they like to hear. But when my girls were younger teenagers, we would say, we're going to the farmer's market on Saturday as a family. We're not bringing our devices, or we're putting them in the trunk. And they resisted. But do you know who had the best time at the farmer's market? Because we were all present with each other, and they probably didn't want to admit it. Our kids need a break too. And sometimes we're the only people who can say, you tell your friends you're not talking past 9, or you don't bring your phone in the bedroom. Like, these kind of physical boundaries are also so good. I actually do. When I started, I had to actually put my phone in a drawer, because just seeing it, just walking by it, I would pick it up. And so if you have to have these physical boundaries, like our bedroom is a no phone zone, or when I come through the door, I put my phone in the charging docket and it stays there till 7. You know, I don't know what will work for you, but don't be afraid of giving yourself these parameters that will help support you in not reaching for the addictive devices.
No, that's I was going to ask that question, actually, just logistically. Where do you
Yeah,
put your phone? And it sounds like, of course, it depends, but out of sight, out of mind seems
definitely.
like a good,
And
process.
and
And
I got into the habit of, I think they call it like double screening or something, where you're watching a TV or a movie and you have your phone. And it kind of occurred to me, I was reading something that was just like, it's not a good practice, like one screen at a time. And I thought, gosh, that's so obvious, So I've been trying, my husband and I, have a show that we watch together. And I've been trying, like, I'm not going to bring my phone over here. Sometimes I do need to know, like, if my 17-year-old is out driving, I might have to have it close. But for the most part, just becoming aware of things that you maybe have been doing in their habits. And you're like, I don't really need to do this anymore. I don't need to have my notifications turned on, or I don't need to let someone have access to me from work at after 7 o'clock. Being able to say, this is what we do in our family, or this is what I do. I mean, boundary setting is really hard. I wrote a whole chapter on it in Soul Shift, like, these are all boundaries, but it's like, if you don't set the boundaries, nobody's going to do it for you.
That's right. And as leaders of our family, as parents, that's our job, is to set the boundaries and set the rules, of this is the type of family we are. And I'd love to, you gave some great examples, but just to real quick get practical again in terms of, what you did as a family, or what you see that works in terms of, like, I loved the story of you, locking the phones in the car for the farmer's market, and I could see that being an argument when my kids get their phones or whatnot. But what, like, kind of rules did you have? I mean, I think you mentioned, like, bedrooms, or
Mm-hmm. So I talked to my girls early on about red flag behaviors. I just mentioned to them that, if you start to feel badly about yourself, like if you notice I'm comparing myself a lot, or I just feel really bad after I've been on the phone, or, there's certain accounts that I'm following, red flag behaviors are like, the way you feel physically or mentally, emotionally, and talking about that sort of thing. I was pretty honest with them about when I would hear things like people had hurt themselves after being bullied online, and that sort of, like, having that open communication about the red flag behaviors. Also, as I mentioned, like, probably the best thing that parents can do to combat the depression and the anxiety that comes with social media is not having the phone in the room. And a lot of times they'll say, well, I need it for my alarm, or that sort of thing. But there's nothing wrong with the old fashioned alarm clock. And my daughters got used to it. That was one of the things when they were, I feel like now that, like I said, they're 17 and 20, and they both thankfully have good sound technology use, that it's mindful, and they use it as a tool, not as an escape. But just those physical parameters early on, that was very powerful for us, is to say, here's where phones are allowed, here's where they're not allowed, here's the time. I love the feature on Apple. You can designate how, they get 1 hour of screen time, or 1 hour on whatever social media platform, if they're on one, and then to stick to that. But it's kind of scary when you do find out, like, wow, how much time teenagers are spending on their phone, and not as a tool, more as an escape. And I do think one of the biggest tragedies of all of that phone use is what's not happening. So instead of pursuing projects and things you're passionate about, and volunteering or doing something that you're interested in, you're literally just scrolling your life away. And so these are things that it's hard to tell them when they want to, it's part of something they also need to feel for themselves. But the more you can talk about those, the awareness, the red flag behavior. I know when my girls would come home from hanging out with people and they would say, it was fun, but we were on our phones the whole time. And so then, okay, what can we can have the friends over here and maybe we can put a basket by the door and we can say, hey, everybody, not that you can't come check your phone when you need to talk to your parents, but just having a place. And like I said earlier, even though our kids might seem resistant, deep down, they're wanting someone to say, hey, real life is happening over here. It's not on the screen. Let me show you. Let me help you. And to be able to say to them, I want to spend time with you. I've got 30 minutes. Let's get in the car. Let's go get a coffee. Let's leave our phones. That actually is just music to a teenager's ears, that my mom or my dad wants to spend time with me and they don't want anything to distract us. That's just soul building.
Yeah. No, that's very true. I mean, and we start with ourselves saying, okay, when I'm on my phone scrolling, how do I feel? Like, it's like,
Yeah.
well, not great. It's not an awesome feeling. It's, to your point, if you really put a finger on it, often it's just distraction,
Yeah.
and, having kids, it makes it more profound, more painful to be like, wait, I'm spending my time on this instead of for my kids. And then also to your point, we're human, we're modeling, right? So the way
Right.
we act is what our kids are going to learn.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of reasons, but they all, kind of all roads lead to self-care and self-kindness and saying, okay, well, when I don't have my phone with me, I'm now alone with my thoughts. It's scary.
Yeah.
What are my thoughts telling me? Let's listen to them. Let's see what's happening. And
And then to be compassionate with whatever those thoughts are that are coming up, because a lot of times when you do get still, that's when you think, well, I'm scared, or I wish I knew how this was going to turn out. And then just to be so compassionate with yourself, because when you're compassionate with yourself, that has a tendency to then spill out. And so then you can be compassionate to those around you.
yeah, yeah, I love that. I love that. Well, thank you, Rachel. This has been an amazing conversation. Again,
Aw.
Soul Shift is the book, and you can find it, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever books are sold. You can find it on her website, handsfreemama.com, and then on Instagram and the socials, she's at the Hands Free Revolution, and that'll all be in the show notes. But Rachel, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a wonderful conversation.
I enjoyed it so much. Thank you, Will.
Thanks.